Welcome to Navigating India. How can a transformative socio-cultural movement become a successful political force? To answer this question, today we have with us Vignesh Rajahmani, who in his recent book, The Dravidian Pathway, explains us how the Dravidian movement transformed itself into a successful electorally viable political party, Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam, and also takes us to Dravidian-Tamil ethos. Vignesh, thank you so much. And I want to start with this question. How did you arrive at this particular topic?
Thank you for the question, Rishwant. In fact, Tamil Nadu presents an interesting outcome, at least, which is it is very high on growth indicators and also very high on development indicators. And this, I'm just going by RBI data. And if one were to look at it, Tamil Nadu is the second biggest economy in terms of size, but in terms of industries, when you were to disaggregate it a little bit more, it may even be in the first rank. And at the same time, it is right up after Kerala in the second position in development indicators, and it is second after Maharashtra and growth indicators in terms of economy size, in terms of development, etc. But if when you were to look at Kerala in growth indicators, it's not even in top 5 or top 10. And Maharashtra also not necessarily in top 5 in development indicators. So how does a state come about to be high growth and high development at the same time? And no, there was no historical advantage that Tamil Nadu had. In fact, in the 1960s, there's actually a report that is easily digestible by the Tony Blair Institute by this person called Karthika Kileshwaran, where and he plots it on the graph, and then he says that based off of already existing literature, that but that UP, Bihar, and Tamil Nadu started at the same place, but the politics that was pursued or was different, and the people that pursued such politics were different, and you had different outcomes. The politics that was pursued and that the people were different is my understanding or my guess, or that was my puzzle. Was it then that the people who were at the helm, were they different, or which led to differential outcomes? So this is how I went back. And also in my master's dissertation, I studied Uttar Pradesh and Bihar also, but then it was too ambitious a project. Then I shrunk my work to Uttar Pradesh, and then also two parts of Uttar Pradesh finally. I mean, as a 20-year-old, I thought UP Bihar will be possible. Then I realized even UP is not possible. Then I realized only two parts in UP is possible. So from there, how social movements emerge, how they become electorally viable, and how they become electorally sustainable was then the question. And in the case of UP and Bihar, there was a moment where they were electorally viable and electorally successful. But today, when we look back, not all of them are electorally sustainable. And why is that the case? Also was the question. So my master's dissertation threw up a few questions. My own understanding of Tamil Nadu threw a few questions, and my own upbringing and my own life experiences in Vijayawada and in Chennai uh, threw open a few more questions. So all of that put together, then I thought, okay, let's understand how politics actually came about to be. And make no mistake, even in Chennai city, you can differentiate between the people that actually vote for the Dravidian parties and the people that don't vote for the Dravidian parties. In fact, it was plotted by the Hindu in a data point article that they brought out. So these differences basically, churned a certain interest, or basically evoked a certain interest. And I approached my master's my mentors during my master's days, Christoph Raffalo or Kriti Kapila, and then they said, okay, we're very interested to put up with you again for 5 more years. And then that's how the PhD happened, and then the book came about.
Now, if we look at the core argument in your work, that is the fact that the Dravidian movement survived as a social movement and succeeded as a social movement, and now a very viable political party. And that is because the capaciousness or the inclusiveness of what you say, Dravidian Tamil identity and Dravidian Tamil ethos. So can you explain what is this Dravidian Tamil identity?
So my understanding, based on my research, is that political identities, are best when they're created. You know, as against living given identities, because given identities generally are ascriptive. You are given by birth, or you're given by your being, etc., not by your doing. So a Dravidian Tamil identity on that note is actually an identity that you become a part of by doing, not by being. So, Dravidian, and two words, let's just break them straight. First word, Dravidian, um, it, it marks a region in the history and in cultural lore and all of that. So, historically and culturally, there's a land that existed south of Vindhyas, and it's called it's called the land of the Dravidians. And now there is a lot of archaeological evidence to say that there are two civilizations and all of that. But all that said and done, it's acceptable to many that this is a separate piece of this is a land marked by separate with some separate characteristics. You read the work of Aloysius, you read the work of Ayodhidasar, you read the work of all, even Robert Caldwell. Uh, um, you will understand that, and the in terms of languages, in terms of people, in terms of practices, etc. So that is a broad geographical marker, which is Dravidian, and which is also different from what we understand as the rest of India. Okay, so it's a distinctive land geography and a geographical. It's a distinctive land and a geographical marker. Next comes Tamil. Tamil being the oldest language in the family of Dravidian languages. Again, as contended by Robert Caldwell, and also now by archaeological excavations. Okay, so when these two things are taken together and when they are politically used, so the word Dravidian gains its political meaning through Ayodhidasar when he says that all the Adi Dravidas, or Dalit castes that we know of today, should claim that should self-report as Dravidians in census. So when he runs a couple of magazines called Urupaisa Tamilan or Tamilan, and he asks all the people to self-claim or self-report, not self-report as Dravidians in census taken by British officers. That's where the administrative/political entry is happening. But at the same time, there were also Shaivites who were fighting against Sanskritic Vaishnavites. There were Tamil Shaivite saints who were fighting against Sanskrit imposition and also Vaishnavite, ethos. And at the same time, there were also another group of people called the Madras Secular Society, who were talking about French Enlightenment theory, and also Western Enlightenment theories, and talking about a secular ethos, which was against religious imposition, okay, or religious orthodoxy. So when all these people are speaking in this particular geography, how do you bring them together? So then, this is how, even in conception, the identity was capacious. So you needed a geographical marker enough to bring all of them together. There were also multiple languages. The Justice Party had Telugu speaking people till about the 30s, being at the helm of Madras presidency. So the capacious identity's core ethos should be that, am I bringing newer and newer subaltern people from the peripheries to the core? And these are, for the lack of a better word, one can argue that, oh, how can you say one as periphery? For the lack of a better analogy, I'm saying, how about a set of subalterns who keep changing? In the 1900s, probably non-Brahmin elites who were in the Justice Party were people who were marginalized in British offices. Therefore, the non-Brahmin manifesto came in, and then therefore the first Justice Party government was formed. But in the 1950s, when they become non-Brahmin elites, they move forward, then next set of people come in. So how about, successive iterations of communities and groups of people coming and becoming a part of the ethos, thereby changing the meaning of the ethos, meaning expanding the meaning of the ethos, and at the same time also changing it if needed. But at the same time, retaining the core, with the core being, you have to be very, very, open to newer minorities, or be it numerical, be it social, be it religious, be it caste, be it gender, whatever. you should be open to them. You should be open to the newer marginalities that come in. As long as you're open, then your identity is robust. So therefore, you end up becoming Dravidian or Tamil or Dravidian Tamil by doing, not by being. So it's a, and you can never be the owner of the identity. If you're a political party, you can only be the contender of the identity. So therefore, you have the DMK and the ADMK, who are two very different parties, who contend for the Dravidian Tamil identities in very different ways. Although they are put in the same line by a lot of, by people who speak from, let's say, from outside. But an outsider's gaze is that the DMK and the ADMK are very similar parties, but they're very different. And one example is the defections between the DMK and ADMK when both the parties were very, very powerful, which is still about the death of Jayalalitha, were less than 5%. So they don't defect. It's not possible. It's not viable to defect from the DMK to the ADMK or the ADMK to the DMK. But after her death, after her demise, it was even now the percentage of defections are still lesser. It is not a complete move. So this is how I understand the Dravidian Tamil identity. So are you able to understand? Are you able to cater to particularistic grievances of subalterns? Are you able to work towards the redistribution of resources, and are you able to give them representation in power? And it is not at all a destination, it's only a journey. So for instance, today Tamil Nadu has 34 caste groups in the Legislative Assembly, which is most diverse for India. But is Tamil Nadu done? No, there are many more steps to go. For instance, one can talk about it a lot, but this is the achievement so far, but it will be a perpetual journey. As against and what non-Brahmin meant, what Dravidian meant in 1900s does not mean the same now. For instance, now LGBTQIA community also have a certain politics vis-a-vis the Dravidian Tamil identity. There are pride marches with a blue and a black line, blue signifying Ambedkar and black signifying Periyar. So in the pride marches in Chennai. And one of the first homosexual couple cases, the LGBTQIA cases, which was fought where petitioners, a homosexual couple, petitioned the High Court of Madras, were actually not from a very elite caste or a very elite class family, but actually a very working class family and a subaltern caste group. And it was litigated by a spokesperson of the DMK, which led to the coming of the glossary by Tamil Nadu government, which then told all the newspapers and the magazines, etc., in terms of how LGBTQIA need to be addressed. So there's a word for lesbian, there's a word for bisexual, there's a word for gay, there's a word for asexual, there's a word for queer in Tamil. So a glossary was given out as a part, amongst other things. So this is how the identity is expanding itself to incorporate newer groups from the margins.
That is interesting. You spoke about the diversity of caste in your legislature, which is a legacy of the Dravidian movement itself. So can you give us a picture of the caste structure in the state of Tamil Nadu? Who is placed where in the hierarchy? And I'm essentially asking this question is to understand who can find place in the wider Dravidian identity when it was created.
Interesting question. In fact, okay, I will try and sort of respond to this question in this way. Largely, Tamil Nadu has only Shudra castes. So there's also Vaishya vacuum. There's no Dvija Vaishya in Tamil Nadu. And there's no Dvija Kshatriya in Tamil Nadu. They're invariably all Shudra caste groups. Okay. Apart from the Brahmin. So therefore, the question always in Tamil Nadu's common sense is the 97 versus the 3, because the proportion of the share of the Brahmin population is also very less. So at that time, based on Eugene Restrick's work, it's basically 3%. Brahmins have 97% posts. Therefore, that's the 97 and 3. And but if you were to sort of based off of my work and some guesstimates and some estimates also, not guesstimates by the way, some estimates of the 1931 census, and then field work after, the Times of India also has split of what caste groups in Tamil Nadu make up. So invariably, the upper castes or the general category, as we would know, would not be more than 10% at best, despite them being Shudra, upper caste, or Dvija, whoever. They'd be not more than 10, at best 15%, at best if you beat it out. But otherwise, it would be around 10%, not more. And then you have a big section of other backward castes, which is based on the NSSO report, is 76%. So if you go by administrative categories, other backward castes is 76%. The Dalit castes or scheduled castes are 20%, which is 96. Okay, 96.1. And then you're left only with 3%, and 3 to 4% upper castes. But if you were to take a few, these Shudra caste groups who also are as socially dominant and economically wealthy, then you can at best push it. Therefore, I said, even if you beat it, it would hardly be 10%. So 15 is a stretch. No way. Okay. So just based on NSSO data, which is 76% backward castes and 20% SCs. So that's Tamil Nadu split. And now, who are the Dravidians? Dravidians are these people. But who can be Dravidian? Even the Brahmins can be Dravidian, because it's an act of it's an identity by doing, isn't it? For example, the constitution of the DMK was written by this person called VP Raman. He was also a Brahmin from Chennai, and he was a very dear friend of Annadurai. And Anna also used to translate his speeches when he was speaking at that time. So they had a collegial relationship. Now, in terms of, if I was to split it a little more, we talk about, upper castes, let's say the Chettiars, a section of Chettiars, a section of large section of Brahmins, a good considerable section of Chettiars, and all are upper castes, because now, when I say a large section of Brahmins, it's because there's still claims by a few Brahmin castes that they're still socially backward. They are not resolved. But if I were to argue, then let's not confuse the viewers, or let's not confuse the listeners. Brahmins, Chettiars, Brahmins, a considerable section of Chettiars, and then a considerable sections of let's say Mudaliyars, Naidus, etc., are all forward castes. But though they have very ritually very different positions to hold on to. And then you have intermediate castes in the form of, let's say, a section of Reddys, again another section of Chettiars, another section, and then the Kunguvelala Gaundars, section of Gaundars, etc. Although Gaundars form a part of the OBCs, so it's a very porous system, and I would have tried explaining this in 7 or 8 pages in my book, starting from relying on K.K. Pillai, Aloysius, and all of that, because it's agrarian first, and then the caste system as we know it, etc. And when you talk about Kshatriya status, then a lot of people in Tamil Nadu actually and the Madras region wanted Kshatriya status, like the Vanniyars and the Nadars. The Nadars gave up on it at some point. The Vanniyars gave up on it very late, so yes, it's a mismatch. It's a porous system, but where the identities get deferred very rigidly is based on practice, therefore. And because of this caste structure also, your identity could become very, very action based, by an identity of the doing, not by being. Because a Kamaraj was very electorally viable in the 1950s when he stood for democratization of education and industrialization of Tamil Nadu or Madras. But in the 60s, in the late 60s, when he could not live up to those expectations, he was defeated by a student leader, thereby making Tamil Nadu a very interestingly resilient form of democracy. Although a lot of people would want to virtue signal and morally put down Tamil Nadu voters for having voted Kamaraj out. But Kamaraj again won the next election, and even today the reverence towards Kamaraj has not gone away at all. But in one election, he was not a viable candidate. They were able to see that difference. So it was a certain sense of democratic maturity. The Raja of Ramanad was defeated by a horse cart puller of his own kingdom. His name is Tangappan. So he was a horse cart puller of the Raja of Ramnad's kingdom or fiefdom, whatever you want to call it. This is princely state, isn't it, Ramnad? So he was defeated by the horse cart. So I mean, you have these stories, but yeah.
That's a very interesting story, but we'll actually come to the defeat of Kamaraj. I think, in fact, that is the only election that he has lost,
Yeah.
if I am not wrong. So we'll talk about that specific election in a moment. But before we go into it, can we take in comparative perspective, which is there was possibility of creating a Dravidian Tamil identity, and the Telugu state, which is Andhra Pradesh, and was very much part of the Madras state before the state reorganization. But there wasn't a united, inclusive Telugu identity, and Tamil identity was able to form. Why do you think? Why do you think is the difference between Telugu identity and the Tamil identity? Why one was formed and one wasn't?
If I was to give you a very straight answer, then the leaders and the contenders of the Tamil identity were the subalterns, were actually were the marginalized. The leaders and the contenders of the Telugu identity were the elites. In other words, after Justice Party, Tamil Nadu had, or Madras region, the Tamil speaking regions of Madras presidency and the Madras state had one or if not two more rounds of politicization. Okay, one under Periyar, the other under Anna, Kalaignar, and all of them. Andhra regions or the Telugu speaking regions, right from the Justice Party's formation, which is non-Brahmin forward castes, okay, when they came to power, which is the Kammas, Reddys, and the Velamas, once they came to power, they created a priestly class within their caste groups called Swakula Brahmins. They did not necessarily challenge it upwards and democratize it downwards. So you'll have to wait till NTR for the OBCs to actually get politicized. Okay. And even forget NTR, even intermediate caste groups like Kapus also could not get politicized, which were quelled together by the. So it is essentially only one round of politicization, which is Justice Party. So the non-Brahmin came to power, but the subaltern within the non-Brahmin could not get politicized. Okay, it was a fight between the Brahmin elite and the non-Brahmin elite. The non-Brahmin elite won under the Justice Party. The non-Brahmin elite went through two more rounds of politicization in Tamil Nadu. In fact, the non-Brahmin elite under Justice Party became electorally unviable in the Madras region, in Tamil-speaking regions of Madras. But if you look at Telugu regions, the same people moved to Congress Party. And the same people moved to Communist Party. You read Selig Harrison's work, he will tell Andhra communists were neither communists nor, were neither proletariats nor workers. It was essentially a caste formation, largely. You read Ants Among Elephant by Sujata Gidla, you will know this. Selig Harrison writes about this, about the Andhra communists. Okay, and if you were to have a very interesting movie take on it, then Rangasthalam is a useful movie to watch. Prakash Raj, in the last 10 minutes, the way he expresses himself, how dare you touch my girl, that's essentially politics of touch, politics of purity and pollution, isn't it? And that did not happen in Andhra. In Tamil Nadu, you see Justice Party becomes electorally unviable. It becomes the Periyar is asked to revive it in the late 30s, okay? And because Kamaraj is heading the Congress's victory in 37. So you're already seeing a backward caste leader becoming electorally viable, although Rajaji is the chief, okay? And then in 40s, you do the same thing. And between 37 and 44, Periyar is actually the leader of Justice Party. And he basically reforms, he takes Justice Party back into a social movement called Dravida Kazhagam. Then next rung of leaders called like Anna, Kalaignar, Madiyalagan, Nedunjalian, and all of them, the Aimberum Talaivargal, or the five big leaders of the Dravidian movement, of the DMK, break away from Periyar and then forge another party called the DMK. It's an offshoot. And then MGR comes to power in 1977. He replaces the Congress party in Tamil Nadu. The DMK is the North and Central Tamil Nadu party. MGR goes South and West, thereby taking Congress out of picture. So many, and then you have the Panthers movement. In the 90s, you have three Dalit parties, under the Dalit Panthers movement, which becomes Vidudalai Sirtaigal Katchi. Next, you have Pudhiya Tamilagam Katchi, etc., for the agrarian Dalits, which is the Devendra Kulavelalars or the Pallars, as they were called before. Now they are called Devendra Kulavelalars. And then the lowest among Dalits, which is like the Madigas. Krishna Madiga gets political opportunity now in Andhra, but a Krishna Madiga equivalent got created a political party in the 1990s in Tamil Nadu. And the Madhika caste equivalent is the Arundadiyars. They've had they've become speaker in the assembly. They have an Rajya Sabha MP seat and all of that. So successive mobilizations. That's why it did not happen in Andhra Pradesh. In Andhra, it's still, for all practical reasons, because I grew up there, it's Kammas, Reddys, and Velamas. It is Kamma versus Reddy in Andhra, and it's Velama versus Reddy in Telangana, broadly speaking. And every other caste group is an interest group at best that can only negotiate to a certain level. You look at the sway of the OBCs from this side to that side. You look at the sway of the Kapus from this side to that side. In Tamil Nadu, you wouldn't see that kind of sway voting. You'll see a very strong vote share. So it did not take even one election for all the voters to move from Congress to Jagan Mohan Reddy. It did not take even one election, in fact, less than one election for all the communists to move from for all the Kammas to move from Communist Party to TDP. So it's two more rounds of politicization is due.
Now, then it's going to take a long time. But before that, I want to talk about this. This year, 2025 marks the 100 years of the self-respect movement. And because you have brought in Periyar into our conversation, so can you give us a picture of the core ideas of the self-respect movement? And also, I want to probe you on one more argument that you made in your work was Periyar was very much interacting with caste associations for the success of creating a Dravidian-Tamil identity, as well as for the success of self-respect movement. Caste association, that is something which is at a rudimentary level considered as something pre-modern, something primordial and backward. So can you illustrate these arguments?
In fact, the first question is very simple. I don't want to complicate it at all. The core element of self-respect movement is self-respect. And if I was to give a 2-mark answer to this, and I don't think any bigger answer would make justice, a 2-mark answer to this is, at the end of it, in a democracy or in a society, the sovereignty of a person should exist within that person. Okay. Does a person feel that she or he is sovereign? And then in democracy, in a representative democracy, you give that sovereignty / public trust to the leadership. Okay. Therefore, constitution is called of the people, for the people, by the people. Okay. And the notion is, if I don't if in a, and what is caste system? It is the exact opposite. It is essentially moderation of aspiration and subjugation of a self from outside and from inside. Okay. Forget the Brahminical person trying to put you down. You yourself don't have the confidence. It works both ways. It's a push and a pull factor. You are pulled from the within and you are pushed from the above. Okay. So they said the only way to fight this is to say all of you have agency, all of you need to have self-respect. Therefore, you can have agency. Therefore, you can have sovereignty. And then caste groups become interest groups where you can negotiate. And therefore, Dravidian-Tamil identity also becomes a horizontal solidarity. I don't become your mic. I am your friend who claps when you speak, and you are my friend who claps when I speak. But you should be your voice. I'll be your amplifier. I should be my voice. You will be my amplifier. This is the case with the Dalits also. Periyar said Ambedkar is our leader. When Gandhi brought in the Harijan project, Periyar said Ambedkar should be the leader during the Pune Pact, and he basically went to association after association, meeting after meeting to say, or to tell all the Dalits that please follow Ambedkar, don't follow Gandhi. And he said, I can never be your leader. If at all I'm coming to you, it's because mutually together we can gain bigger. He says, if I fight alone and if you fight alone, probably we'd be left with breadcrumbs. But if we get together for our own interests, we may get bigger. So that was his notion. It was not to sort of subsume one into another. It is not to say that. And he said the problems are there. And in fact, he goes to Dalits and says that you should be assertive. The OBC will come to you, the upper caste will come to you, the intermediate caste will come to you, the British will come to you, the Congress will come to you. Therefore, you are the person that they are trying to bargain with. If you have a notion of self-respect, you will be able to bargain best. That's the notion of self-respect movement. And therefore it gets, so therefore oppression is the problem, no matter what it is. You know, if someone asks you that, oh, you're a non-veg eater, therefore I won't give you house, then you can shout back at that person and come back saying, stop being regressive. Comes from the notion of self-respect. It's a very again expansive notion, but very fundamental in its way. But now coming to caste associations. I mean, this is done in the work of Rudolph's. Caste associations in the in the 1800s and early 1900s were also there, but they were seen as a means for the community leaders to improve their community now that the British are in power. Because there is an administrative, the Councils Act of 1861, and Queen's Proclamation 1858, Councils Act 1861, and then there was also a lot of educational interventions and much before, even when it was the East India Company as against the British government, and then the Minto Morley reforms 1909, Montagu Chelmsford 1919. So in this time period, you see a lot of caste groups or leadership within or the elites within certain communities emerging and then saying, let's all collectively negotiate for our powers. So in that way, these caste associations were not trying to speak about caste pride. They were talking about social, economic, and educational mobility. And the Nadar associations are the best example. The Nadar Mahajana Sangam, for example. They were invested in building schools. They were invested in building colleges. They were invested in creating jobs. They were invested in creating banking systems, etc. So from being a half polluting caste, not 200 years before now, less than 200 years before now. Now they are the most viable mercantile class in India. So that's the story of the Nadars, for example. I mean, Robert Hargraves has written an entire book about it. So that's even the 1 years for that matter. Although 1 years had a more checkered trajectory. But even in the 1990s, in North Tamil Nadu, when you look at Periyar, Ambedkar and Marx, the Troika photo, that was actually given by the 1 Year Association. And in the 1990s, when they were fighting for reservation, it's subcategorization within the backward caste, which is the MBCs, which in Kalinga's government they got, Kalinga Karunanidhi's government they got. So in the 80s, it was the 1 Year Associations were interested or invested in creating, workshops for filling government applications. So they're called in Tamil, they're called Mugam. So it would just be a small shed, asbestos shed, and Xerox copies or photocopies of, or basically copies of application forms. I'm not sure the photocopy machine was there at the time. In Tamil, the word they use is pradigal. Pradigal is copies. Copies of application forms would be brought in. Youngsters and students would be asked to fill these up in terms of how to get government jobs. So it's a very different approach. So Periyar said, let me go to caste associations, tell them that there is nobody above, there is nobody below. That's how I'll create a horizontal solidarity. And he being the person that he was, he didn't care much about criticism. And he would sit through and listen to people abusing him, literally. He would listen to it and he would still reason. So he had a certain kind of patience in him. Although when you listen to him speak and write and all, you would think of him as shooting in all sorts of directions. But posthumously, when you look at him, he lived in the moment. And in that meeting, he saw how I should persuade people. He was not in the business of theory making. He met people day in, day out, which meant he was in the business of persuasion. And his persuasion was to convince people that nobody was above, nobody was below. And that was his approach in terms of how he engaged with people. That was his approach with caste associations also. And at some point, he gives up on that, or basically he reduces it and starts caste abolition conferences. So now I've spoken enough. Now I've done enough groundwork to tell people that you're all, stop having inflated imaginations about yourself. You're not that big. And then to go on and say, now let's try and sort of abolish caste, was his notion after. Yes.
No, when we speak about Dravidian movement, the component of language sounds much bigger than the movement itself at times. So what are your reflections on it? Is it actually that? Is it actually primarily the language?
No, the approach to it changed in three ways. Okay. In fact, when you say the language, is it language purity? No. A lot of Dravidian leaders or Dravidian movement leaders were actually Telugu speaking at home. And a lot of people who supported the Sri Lankan Tamil cause also were actually Telugu speakers at home. So, I mean, and and that kind of distinction was not seen by them. It's actually brought by the nativists, which is basically see people like Seaman and all, who started looking at DNA certificates, etc., or basically birth certificates, all of that. Or how Tamil are you? This was a region marked by a lot of migration and a lot of cross pollination in terms of businesses. I mean, and I say cross pollination, suddenly people would have, they intermarried. There's a lot of intermarriage that happened. In fact, Kulatunga Chola married, even in the Cholas, later Cholas, there was a lot of Telugu, there was a lot of Tamil, there was a lot of other languages and things like that and all. So, be that as it may, so you are building something not from scratch, but so the Dravidian movement was not worried about a mosaic. They in fact embraced mosaic. They imagined society to be a mosaic of plurality, and they embraced it. And so Tamil essentially became a language that could be used as a vehicle of conveying resistance. In fact, in my reading room chapter, I would have written a line saying, reading, listening to one person reading was meant that you could listen to, you could hear a lot, you could consume a lot of knowledge. But debating in Tamil meant that you could express in your own language. There was no hard and fast rule in terms of how to sort of approach this. You know, Tamil gave you an ease to engage, because the first hesitation that you have when you go to a big school or a big college or a big space is that, will I be able to converse in the language that they expect me to converse in, or even a newer space. So speaking in Tamil or Tamil as a language, in practice or in play, meant that you could converse very happily. You could express yourself well. Then then came the freedom to make mistakes. Only when you can converse and be confident of yourself can you have the freedom of making mistakes. No? Then you learned. It was an associational activity. Reading, speaking, debating, and then learning together. So that's how I see, Tamil being the case. And also, Dravida Nadu, when it was imagined by Anna, was seen as a federation with free entry and free exit. So, like how they understood caste groups as basically coming together and negotiating for social, economic, and educational empowerment of marginalized, with the notion of dignity and justice. Okay. The imagination of Dravida Nadu was that, saying, yes, come together, let's negotiate in the federal setup. You can negotiate with the union better. You can have projects that are mutually useful, and also you can have a culture that is pan South India. So it was a very very it was a relationship that was forged in a lot of comfort and mutually agreeable terms, which can always be revisited. It was not a contract that was set in stone. It was not a rigid contract at all. It was very very fluid, and that was something that I've understood about that I learned from the Dravidian movement, is that they were not scared of being fluid, because they had they saw it as a means to be agile. But both these were possible only because they were willing to sort of unlearn and relearn as they go forward.
If I can probe you further on the caste associations, there is also this idea about various streams of thought about caste names in the state of Tamil Nadu. So should we actually keep our caste name, or should we change it and add the word Adi to it, right? To claim that we are old communities who have always been here, or to completely remove a caste name and have a neutral name. So can you explain this, and how the Dravidian movement over time have seen these questions?
So in terms of caste names, so in the 1920s and the 1930s, when Periyar starts writing in public, in fact, the word Dravidian was given, like I said, was political entry was made through Ayodhya Dasar. Um, so Dalits calling themselves as Dravidians or Dalit castes or lower castes, whoever followed. In fact, Masilamani Mudaliar, I recently learnt about him in a conference in Heidelberg by this young PhD scholar. Uh, in fact, he worked with Ayodhidasar. He was in the Madras Secular Society in the 1800s, in the late 1800s, and then he went to work with once the Madras Secular Society sort of waned. Then he went worked with Masilamani Mudaliar worked with Ayodhidas. So for a brief while, and so therefore people with like-minded ideas actually came together at that time and pushed a notion of an egalitarian society, okay, or pushed for a more just society. Let's Egalitarian probably was a farther destination, but then they pushed for egalitarian ethos at least. So in that process, so one such differentiating item that you had in your name was your name in itself and its suffix, you know. So ex Nadar, ex Gounder, ex Thevar, ex Iyer, ex Iyengar, all of these things, isn't it? So whatever your name, that's the suffix. And then the names in itself, a lower caste person cannot be named, will only be named Kuppan, Subban, etc. You would not have these nice names, quote unquote. Um, and this being the prevalent reality at that time, um, Periyar sort of spoke about giving up on these caste names in his writings and speeches, etc. And in 1944, in the Salem Conference, in the Salem Conference of the Justice Party, which is when the Justice Party becomes Dravida Kazhagam, they pass a resolution that people should give up their caste names and any title. So any Rao Bahadur, any etc. All these titles at the start and caste suffixes at the end should be given up. And it is being followed up almost 80 years after today. In fact, 81 years after at that time, 81 years after 1944, today, when the chief minister says even all roads and public streets and boards, billboards, etc., also should give up on those titles. So it is to say that, okay, at least in a secular space, I'm not able to sort of weed out caste in your private space, but at least in a secular space, let's call people by name as against their caste suffix. It is a first step of creating a quote unquote egalitarian / secular setting where the politics of social justice can be pursued. In other words, it is to say that, oh, let's at least start this conversation by this. Or in a game of poker, it's the small blind. So small blind was essentially to say that give up your caste names and now let's start talking. So yes, Tamil Nadu does not have it. They have fathers' names, and a big role was played in three ways. One, the school teachers had played a big role when in the 1950s, when the school joining or the enrollment rate was increasing, the school teachers ensured that the kids were not named with caste titles. They in fact gave fathers' names. And the Dravida Kazhagam and the Justice Party leaders, and in fact even all the secular leaders, be it from self-respect movement or from the Congress Party, from the DMK, etc., or even the communists, they all had a naming tradition. In fact, one feeds off of another, isn't it? So they had naming traditions. A set of names came from Tamil Sangam literature. For example, Pungulali, Kottravai, all of these names came from classic Sangam Tamil literature. And a set of names came from the Western Enlightenment. Foucault, Rousseau, Roosevelt, Voltaire, etc. And a set of names came from Russian Revolution. In fact, Stalin, our chief minister's name, Stalin, and also from the left movement, Stalin, Marx, and a few came from the freedom movement also. For example, the students' wing leader of the DMK is called Rajiv Gandhi. So you have a lot of Gandhis. In fact, one of the tallest, the most, one of the vital leaders of the DMK today, K. N. Nehru. His name is Nehru. And he's one of the most tall leaders of the DMK today. I mean, in fact, in the top 5, top 10, his name would be there. In any metric for that matter. So his name is Nehru. So you have these names that have come through the years, and also Tamil names. In fact, when you said neutral names, it's secular Tamil names, which the Dravida Kalagam also brought about. Anbarasan, Arivarasan. Arivarasan would be Arasan means king, so king of intelligence. Anbarasan is king of care, love, friendship. Adivarasi, Anbukarasi, Kanimoli. In fact, all these are names that came from the very neutral sounding names. In fact, to the extent that mm, in educational institutions in Delhi, the moment you say such name, a professor can say that, oh, that's such a DMK name. I've also heard youngsters listen to such things said.
Now, I remember watching this film Karnan, and all the more key characters were named after Mahabharata references. So we can take this on the legacy of the Dravidian movement and caste politics.
Mahabharata, the retelling of Mahabharata, yes. In fact, the movie Karnan is a retelling, isn't it? There, the protagonist is Karnan. Okay, and also the idiom of Karnan has also been changed. Karnan doesn't die in that movie. It's actually it's a take. It's a flipped take. You flip the existing story on its head and tell the story differently. I mean, an example that a lot of your listeners may be aware of is the Palace of Illusions. Palace of Illusions is basically the story of Draupadi being, story of Mahabharata told from Draupadi's lens. So it's basically, so you have something called Ravana Kavyam in Tamil Nadu in the 1900s, where Ravanan is not a bad name or is not a bad word at all. In fact, the argument is that he also had a story to tell. Let's hear him out as well. So, so yeah, in Naragasuran during Deepavali, there are families that mourn the death of Naragasuran as well, and even Murugan, which today's party in power wants to sort of today the BJP is trying to organize Murugan conferences. The Hindu Munnani, all of them organize conferences on Murugan, saying that here we found a god who's a Tamil god who will promote. But even they had problems sort of grappling with the idiom of Murugan, because when they went to a region called Tirupurangundram and they said, oh, this mountain's supposed to be vegetarian from now on, the local people said, no, he's a meat-eating god. All our prayer songs to him say that, if you don't give him a young goat as meat, as feast, he doesn't listen to us. So in fact, that's the way to pray to him. Okay. And there are many temples like that also, Ayanar, Mariamman, etc. And okay, you forget the Murugan from Tirupurangundram, you go to Tiruchendur. The festival is called Sura Samharam, not Asura Samharam. In fact, the Murugan there, kills Sura Padman. He was a Sura, not an Asura. So you have these, and even in very recent movies which are taken, even very recent movies, there's a movie called Mukutyaman, where there is a song where it says where the antagonist of the movie, who the goddess is trying to fight, is actually a Sura. In a song, it plays that way. I mean, like, so yeah, I mean, you have an alternate story there. I mean, so you'll have to. The easiest way to understand Tamil Nadu is to actually listen, as against speak. So, I mean, luckily for us, you are the listener, therefore I'm speaking. Otherwise, in Chennai itself or during my fieldwork, I'm only listening. I'm listening to people telling their stories and telling not just their stories, but the story of Tamil Nadu itself in terms of how it's a mosaic.
To further think about the Dravidian identity itself, so how does Dravidian identity looks at the women's question?
So, much similar to the language question, the women's question also had gone through a couple of iterations. So, existing literature tells that there is one, deviation or a point of rupture, not rupture necessarily, but a disjuncture. One point of disjuncture was in 1937 when the anti-Hindi agitations take shape. So till the 1937 and anti-Hindi imposition agitations come about, The self-respect movement was pursuing the cause of the women and based off of women's agency and women's rights and all of that. And then the Tamil Shaivite movement also was pursuing women's question, but within the Tamil Shaivite tradition. But these two worlds collide in the 1937 anti-Hindi agitation when they lead the protest together. Anti-Hindi imposition agitation was led together. So when the question of language was pushed from the above in 1937 and also in 1956 uh, with the linguistic reorganization, and also in 1965 the anti-Hindi imposition agitations, right? So and also 1953 when reorganization was started, Andhra state was formed, etc. So 37 and then 53, 56 and then 65. Across these three spectrums, language becomes a little bit more important or a little bit more of a an item of distinction, a distinguishing factor. These three being external pushes. The internal pressure was also that you needed to create a Dravidian Tamil identity. Yes, you are building it as an egalitarian ethos, secular, progressive, all great. But where is your glorious past? Because for a cultural identity to survive, you need some kind of a glorious past to hark back to. The great Islamic civilization of Sunnah, the great Hindu civilization of 60,000 years before. So, what is the great Tamil civilization or the great Dravidian civilization? Then Anna takes Tamil Nadu back to Sangam era, the abstract version of the early Sangam era. Okay, where you have very less knowledge about that Sangam era, but at the same time, whatever knowledge you have of it, it's only egalitarian society where you say women participation is not a problem and all of that. So you create a golden past, a golden age, which was an egalitarian past. Okay, so and this is where social movements meet electoral politics. When you have a golden era and you have a cultural nationalistic ethos, women, have the question of women face a struggle. Are they going to be fully will they be individuals slash women, or will they be mothers slash sisters slash women? Because every nationalistic ethos or every cultural nationalism or every sort of an identity making project or every group making project has a role for the woman, which is some kind of a motherly role and a sisterly role. So, for example, there's this book by Claudia Kuntz called Of the Mothers and Sisters of the Fatherland, where she talks about Nazi Germany being defended finally actually by the women. So, how did they resolve this? They resolved it, or my understanding of the resolution is by splitting the women empowerment question into three parts. One is welfare, representation, and empowerment. Okay, so in terms of welfare, you look at Tamil Nadu's, indicators, women indicators, they do well through and through. Maternal mortality rate, infant mortality rate, in terms of school education, college education, gross enrollment ratio, all of that. And then you look at them in the workforce, highest in India. And in fact, 41% of women working in factories work in Tamil Nadu. So all sorts of that. So welfare, you look at welfare, and women in tertiary sector also are also high. Okay, so and disposable income in the hands of women is also high compared to other states, and you also have a certain rights-based framework. For example, across the country, you have welfare schemes named as Lakshmi Bhandar, Griha Lakshmi, Ladli Behna, etc. But in Tamil Nadu, it is called Magali Urimai Togai, Women's Right Scheme, or Women's Rightful Sum. But Urimai is the right, Togai is sum of money. So you name it into the rights-based framework, although it is delivered as a welfare scheme. Okay, but where are now the things that you need to improve upon? The things that you need to improve upon are representation. It needs to come from the bottom up. Okay, So the first step is that there is the Panchayati Raj Institutions Act meant that women need to get representation for sure because of affirmative action in local self government. So 20 years of that now means that you have a lot of women, and also within the parties there is a women quota, that party positions also need to go to women. So have they achieved the equilibrium? No, not yet, but it is taking shape. I see some improvements, but a 20-year analysis will tell us in terms of how well entrenched women are within parties and how well entrenched women are in representation posts. But if I, without sort of obfuscating any facts, if I was to tell you the number of women in as MLAs in Tamil Nadu Legislative Assembly are only 5%, as much as it is in Kerala. So the developed states conundrum is you could produce a woman chief minister in Tamil Nadu. I'm not sure of Kerala, I don't think, but and if you take the help of Kerala also as comparable states, you only have women MLAs as 5%. So which is 12 MLAs, I think, if I'm not wrong. 2021 data, yeah. Yes, so but that's been worked upon. But at the same time, you also look at the DMK very actively supporting 33% reservation, because then a party that is 75 years old, and the cadres that are working for almost 2-3 generations can be convinced, saying that, oh, it's an external rule you need to follow. So engineering it internally will take 20 years time, but if a rule comes, then it can be done quickly. So therefore, they pursue both. They'll support a women representation bill also, despite knowing that it may create internal friction in the party. But at the same time, they'll also push quotas which are more incremental. They're open for a shock, to absorb the shock, but at the same time, they'll also create. They're also at least trying to create conducive environment for women representation. And now, once these two happen properly, the empowerment question is full.
Now, in your book, you write extensively about how both for the Periyar's Dravida Kazhagam as well as unauthorized Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam, the key for disseminating their ideology of the Dravidian ideology is through reading rooms. Could you elaborate on that?
The fundamental idea was that the knowledge needs to be democratized. What is the asymmetry that sustains caste system in India? What is the pivot of asymmetry that sustains caste system in India? Knowledge. Who is the knowledge maker and who has access to knowledge? The other thing is gender, or in fact, I'd flip it the other way: gender. As long as the woman's body and agency and choices are moderated, controlled, and subjugated, you can have endogamy / everything, so that you can have a pure society. And with that pure society, what do? You control knowledge making skills, or knowledge making space, sorry. And knowledge makers and knowledge access and knowledge dissemination is controlled. And that is the asymmetry on which the entire society's hierarchization is predicated upon. You can be a very wealthy person, but you should still come to me to learn. So the logic is exact opposite. It's in fact straightforward: disseminate and democratize knowledge. So in the way that people read. So there's a lot of translation, there's a lot of reading, there's a lot of speaking, there's a lot of writing, there's a lot of debating. And therefore reading rooms were not libraries. And in fact, when I went to Virudhunagar, I saw one Congress sympathetic library at that time, where the manager or the incharge there told me that, here people actually read for themselves. If you actually want to know about places, if you want to know of a place where people shout out and perform, that's the place. And the place was called Arvial Mandram, or Science Hall, and this other thing was called Ram Ratnasamy Nadar Library. So I went to that place. The setting itself was very different. It was one big table with a lot of chairs, where one person could read out and everybody could listen. But it was still in a round table, not in a stage setup. It was a round table where one person could read and everybody else would listen and then speak and then talk, debate, sorry, and then write also. And there were competitions that were run called Eluthu Por and Swar Por. So all of that. Elithapur is basically elocution competition, and essay writing competition, and Swarpur is elocution competition, and those would get then published. Those would then get published. So reading writing meant that you could create a vocabulary amongst people. You could create a talking public, a reading public, a thinking public, and then when you talk about issues up at the top, then it would get disseminated quickly. For instance, I heard about there's a person that asked me about where I was from, and I said, "Oh, I'm studying in London." And then he said, "Who's your professor? Is your professor British?" He said, "No, he's a French." And I said, "Oh, he's a nice guy." I said, "Yeah, very nice guy." Then he said, "Oh, but the much better than British, is it?" He asked. I said, "I can't answer that." Then he said, "But the French occupation of Algeria was bad, wasn't it?" Then I said, "Where did you read this?" He said, "Oh, I read it in unauthorized." He's an 80-year-old man, 85-year-old if not. So he read about French occupation of Algeria, and how bad it was from a magazine that Anna ran called Homeland, if I'm not wrong. So you could speak the language of the world. You could speak the politics of the world in the language that you were comfortable with. Sorry, I'd like to rephrase that. Yeah. So you could talk about the world, you could talk to the world, but in a language that you knew, that you were comfortable with.
So are these reading rooms still vibrant in Tamil Nadu in terms of for the DMK's electoral success, if I can ask?
The public sphere is vibrant, but they are in Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at that time Clubhouse during the pandemic. Yes, they are vibrant, but to that same extent, probably lesser, because the time in the hands of people is also lesser. But if you were to take the amount of time, you look at YouTube, the kind of talk that happens, good, bad doesn't matter. Is it quality, quantity doesn't matter. But there's a lot of content being produced and a lot of content being consumed. Relatively, yes, the state is a lot vibrant compared to the others. But if you compare it with the past, then it's not an apple to apple comparison, because now the kind of time that you have to engage with on these matters is less. But during COVID time, I would be on Clubhouse all day raising money for my PhD, for instance. Like, I would speak, then there would be some, because a lot of people had money also, you're not spending out. So Clubhouse actually helped, because these people are talking active politics. Me Too movement was being discussed at that time there very openly. The who's who were actually being called out, talked about without any problem, without any fears.
No, you also write that so the DMK's electoral success also lies in how it responded to some of the national level challenges. The first one comes with the cancellation of the government order, which was actually passed during the Justice Party in the state of Madras to give affirmative action to certain sections. Would you reflect on that particular issue?
See, in India, I mean, any politician will tell you this: once you give a scheme in, you can't take it back. Okay. Anything that comes should be over and above that or alongside it. Okay. This is for a welfare scheme. Imagine for a rights-based law. The communal GO was a rights-based framework, intervention where you were promising representation in jobs and in education, which meant that is my only vehicle to mobility, isn't it? So now once the government at the center changes, doesn't mean you can take it away. You should continue with those things. Anything which is draconian, yes, you're happy to go. They're happy to go. But anything that has been helping me, you can't take that away. And that was a one mistake which the courts ruled at that time, and that too over a person that did not have any locus standi, the Champakam Durai Rajan case. And there was no locus standi, and then the court immediately said, "Oh, this is against equality, etc." And there is this colleague and a friend of mine called Tripur Daman Singh, who speaks about it in his book called 16 Stormy Days, where the First Amendment needed to be brought in, where right to the freedom of speech was also had reasonable restrictions, right to property was taken away, and then the reservation or affirmative action was restored, or basically brought out in the constitutional fashion. So Why was it a big issue in the Madras region? It was because in the Madras state, because that was the vehicle of mobility for subalterns, and you can't stop it. And the same thing holds for anti-Hindi agitation as well. In response to a previous question of yours, how was language dealt with? Language was a mobility to basically express and get empowered. So in the 1965, when you say that from tomorrow onwards, the Tamil that you learnt and the English that you learnt will not be useful. You should learn Hindi, otherwise you won't get a government job. Imagine a guy or a girl who studied for the last 15 years. That's why it was a student-led movement. And that is how Kamaraj also was defeated by a student leader. School children participated, college students participated, and they did not kill for their language. They killed themselves for their language. They did not kill others. Because it was a do or die situation. It was a situation of socio-economic and educational mobility. In that sense, it is not an elite-led mobilization. An elite-led mobilization should say, "How dare you do this?" That would be the first question, to say that, "Oh, this is my great language." But here, it is the first notion that comes in minds of people is the precarity. Oh, so much has been done. What about the socio-economic and educational mobility of the subalterns? So this is a lot more composed and therefore a lot more sustainable resistance.
No, that's a very interesting parallel between the affirmative action movement as well as the anti-Hindi agitation. Can I also get your comments about another thing that you're speaking about, which is DMK's opposition as well as DK's opposition to the modified scheme of education, the Kulakalvi Thittam, started during the Rajaji's government in Tamil Nadu.
Same thing. Now you'll have the same. Now you'll have a thread. See, a common thread between all these problems. From 1940 onwards, you're trying to from 1920s onwards, there is one kind or the other of school education that's been promoted in India or in the Madras presidency and then Madras state. Children are coming to schools and learning, and be it Justice Party, Congress government under Kamraj, Congress government under Rajaji, etc. In fact, Congress government under Rajaji, not Kamraj. And even in the 1950, in fact, Kamaraj becomes chief minister only in 1954, although he was very vital in the 1937 Congress victory in Madras presidency. So from 28 or from 20s onwards, you have a series of iterations of affirmative action. Therefore, subaltern children coming to schools, reading, etc. All of that's happening, and there is a break in between, and which needed to be restarted in 1940. So a lot of these intelligent people who are trying to criticize the DMK today will say that, oh, from 1928 onwards, you had good enrollment rates. But there's a rupture in between, which is 1940, 1935 Government of India Act, 1940, and then the Quit India movement, then the independence, and then it needed to be restored at some point. So it was a piecemeal system till then. And in 1950s, schools need to be reopened, isn't it? That's the question that Rajaji had, that I need to reopen schools to enroll students, isn't it? Therefore, I don't have money is the question. So if Madras had a continuing system of education, why did Rajaji have to reopen schools, or open schools for that matter? And then the solution is go help your parents, isn't it? Go help your parents in their own jobs, in their own caste-based occupations. But if you go by Ambedkar in India, it is not division of labor, it's division of laborers. Right. So then, which means I came to formal secular education so that I can break, or I can have the choice to break away from my hereditary occupation. And you're taking the choice away from me. And that was the problem. In a society where you talk about self-respect, agency, secular ethos, progressive thought, etc., you can't suddenly say that go back to doing what your father was doing. And therefore, it is a very, very, unpopular, scheme, which needed to be scrapped. Rajaji quit, Kamaraj scrapped it, and then brought the midday meal scheme back.
A kind of a break point in your work is what you talk about is the 1967 assembly elections in the state of Tamil Nadu. And in that elections, the big leader Kamaraj was defeated by a 28-year-old student leader, Right. And you say that this also marks the apotheosis of a Congress decline in the state of Tamil Nadu. So, would you reflect on that?
So the Congress was a big was a cadre based party as it was developed in the 30s and the 40s under Kamaraj. Okay, and Kamaraj was a very astute organizer. And in fact, one can draw many parallels between Kalaignar, Karunanidhi, and Kamaraj in the way they built their party networks up by giving enough freedom to people to their subordinates. So they believed in sort of giving responsibility and authority also to their subordinates because they were very confident people in themselves. They knew that at the end of it, I can pull this rope back. So they engaged in like relatively longer ropes. So therefore, the organizations that they built, be it the DMK under Kalaignar or Congress under Kamaraj, were very astute political vehicles and political engines, electorally also speaking. But Congress had this problem also of courting a lot of elites at the time, isn't it? So in 1950s itself, Sangarlinganar, one of the Gandhians, there was a trouble. There was a conflict, or in fact tension between the Gandhians in the Congress and then the elites in the Congress, where the Gandhians were asking the elites to shed their eliteness and come do people's work. Uh, so Sangarlinganar, for example, is one such example where he urged the Kamaraj government at that time to bring some kind of reform in the Congress party also. So that this is the Congress for you. But still, they were electorally viable. They were electorally active. All of that. But Kamaraj, when he goes away for K Plan or in the name of K Plan to revive the Congress party, he loses touch with Tamil Nadu. He loses touch with Tamil Nadu, or he's not in Tamil Nadu as much as people expected him to be. There's a certain kind of Kamaraj access that Tamil Nadu people were, or Madras state people were used to, which reduced. Okay. And the question and the answer to that was he's basically gone to national duties, which which was convincing for people, but not convincing enough with when the pressures were mounting, when the inflation was high, when the anti-India imposition agitation came about, all of that, the pressures were mounting, and then the 17th Amendment to Constitution, which is Rayatwari lands also can be taken away. And make no mistake, Kerala and Tamil Nadu had Rayatwari lands at the time. So that means that you can lose your land also. Okay. So all of these, but this doesn't take away from the reverence that people still have with him. In fact, Kamaraj's defeat is just to say that he is actually a human being who can be relatable and who continues to be relatable today, as against a deified figure who's put in a pedestal and put away. In fact, Kamaraj's defeat tells us that he's still a leader who can be accessed, who can be engaged with, even if he's dead. And that's what the DMK did also. The DMK considers, and in fact, I've written this in my book, the DMK considers Kamaraj to be the bridge between Congress ethos and the Dravidian ethos. Kamaraj initiated the de-Brahmanization of Congress party. In 1957 election, he gives seats to 50, almost close to 50 seats to Dravida Kazhagam people in his party, in the Congress party. So, so yeah, I mean, and therefore he's seen as Karma Veerar, a warrior of deeds, a Perundalaivar, the great leader. These are the names, these are the tags given by the DMK leaders. And make no mistake, in that election also, the DMK leadership was not hoping that they would defeat him. Kalaignar did not go to campaign, Anna did not go to campaign, MGR did not go to campaign. It was only a student-led movement. 300 to 400 students led the movement, and they won it. It's a story at the end of it of the student leader who won, and he also campaigned. He campaigned against 17th Amendment. It is not as if he just won over a wave. He also contributed to creating that wave. So yes, I mean, so this is how Kamaraj, and the apotheosis of Congress decline. After that, there were no efforts to revive Congress party. Also because Congress party faced a big jolt, isn't it? The stalwarts of the Congress organization were big in Madras presidency, But with the coming of Indira Gandhi, she broke the Congress organization, Congress O. It became Congress I. And Congress I only had, coalition deals with the DMK in the 71 election. And after that, there is emergency, there are ruptures, there was no Congress leader that could emerge. At the in the emergency rupture, MGR came up, which meant he quickly sort of went after all the Congress bastions and then made them ADMK. So 10, 15, 20 years of break. You can't revive the party quickly, isn't it? And then the 90s, the decade of the 90s, where you did not, after Rajiv Gandhi, where did you have a stable government in India itself?
So, how do you see the current DMK establishment different from the Anna's DMK, later the Karunanidhi's DMK? And finally, what do you bet on for the 2026 assembly elections in Tamil Nadu?
Okay, the DMK under Anna was an upstart. Okay, a very, very viable, very agile upstart. The DMK under Kalaignar transitioned into a beast that could sustain or withstand the pressures from be it external pressures from the union, internal pressures within the state. So yeah, so the DMK under Kalaignar was a force of resilience and resistance. The DMK under Kalaignar was the DMK that was out of power for the for more period than being in power, and still not having any defections. It's a completely other beast altogether. You're still a discourse maker despite being out of power. So that is the kind of and also make no mistake, you do not have the halo of being from an elite background, and you also see that in Tamil Nadu, which is actually muscle memory for a lot of people. I have a lot of respondents who are very, very cautious when it comes to addressing Jayalalitha. Madam Jayalalitha is addressed with a lot of reverence or a lot of caution. But the same elites will not give that respect for Kalaignar Karunanidhi. One way that I see it is Kalaignar is still a lot more accessible and engageable, etc. But when you look at the approach of people, you can easily say something against Mayawati, but not against Yogi. If statues was an issue, why is Mayawati statues only issue? Why aren't the statues today being an issue? We all grew up to criticize the statues that Mayawati built, right? In UP. So aren't any statues being built in UP today? By that logic. So Anna was able to Anna was able to build an upstart, very, very, an upstart organization, which is the DMK, amidst a lot of, towering personalities in India. And Kalaignar faced the wrath of all of those elite quarters because they became electorally viable. Then you face the pushback, right? You're climbing the slope and then you suddenly you're at the top and everybody's trying to pull you down. You have to withstand and you have to sort of stand there. That's the strength. That's a different kind of an. And now with Mr. Stalin, he faces two pressures, internal and external both. At least Kalaignar had an MGR, who was the bulwark in one way or the other. MGR was Kalaignar's bulwark, Kalaignar was MGR's bulwark. But today, you have MK Stalin being alone. You do not have and I'll explain it to you in a bit when I talk about it 2026. So Stalin is one man army now in other ways. Or the DMK today is actually one organization that is trying to stand up to Tamil ethos and progressive ethos of Tamil Nadu as we know it today. It needs to do discourse management. It needs to do resource mobilization for the people, and also to fight elections. And it also needs to do personal management to fight elections. You do not have support from, you do not have an ideologically similar person in this space. But at the same time, the DMK has emerged really well in terms of bringing in an ideological unity across different political parties. The VCK, again a towering personality in the name of Tirumavalavan. The communist parties, very strong. They have their grassroots mobilization still active. The DMK has been, the biggest, or as you may call it, the OG in the picture. Okay, and then you have smaller parties that are sort of coming in, Makkal Nidhi Mayam, Kamal Hassan, etc. All of these people coming together and then fighting an election together, which is like, which is a Herculean task in itself. Okay, and but now in terms of 2026, why I call MK Stalin's role very difficult. Between 1977 and 2021, if you look at the DMK and ADMK together, the alliances put together, the DMK plus and ADMK plus have 85% vote share through and through. This is the Dravidian fort, as you know it. Dravidian electoral fort is this. Okay. So if the winner takes 45% vote share, the loser gets 40% vote share. That's all. So any third party that's coming in who's trying to rupture, who's trying to create a rupture, is only restricted in the residual vote share, which is 15%. Anybody emerging very big in the 15% will make the election difficult for the for the ADMK and the DMK. For example, Vijay made the election difficult in 2006. Seaman made the election close in 2021. For example, 76 seats, the vote margin was less than 10,000. Okay, and then of which I think some 30-40 seats less than 5,000. But in 2024, for the first time, that 85 has become 70. So the DMK alliance still holds 46% vote share, 46 or 47 if I'm not wrong. And ADMK only has 23. And the BJP under the NDA alliance has forged 20%, and Seaman took 10. So this is the problem in front of DMK. It's not about are we winning the election or no. It is who is occupying the other territories. The position, the second position is the question. So a tight election is not DMK's problem. Make no mistake. The DMK as a machinery, as much as I've sort of done field work for almost 4 years. Be it Dindukal, Tirupur, districts like Dindukal, Tirupur, south of Tamil Nadu, in the west, south of Tamil Nadu, Virudhunagar, Sivagasi, Tirunelveli, and north of Tamil Nadu, Dharmaburi, Chengalpet, etc., which is just outside Chennai, and also Hosur, which is adjoining to Karnataka. All these regions, you look at the party, even where where the party considers itself to be weak, there is presence. And the party considers itself to be weak because it's not able to win the election, but they still get 30-35% vote share, by the way. So which means, so even in the party's own admission of strongholds and weak holds, their presence is prevalent, is pervasive. So the worry is not that what they will do if the election is difficult. They don't mind a difficult election. Their worry is, or as the larger contender of the Dravidian-Tamil ethos, their worry is what about the Dravidian-Tamil ethos in itself. So therefore, you would see the DMK actually taking on, ideology questions alongside election questions. So federalism is an important pivot for them, because then that's an ideological question as much as it's an election question. So they've blended ideology and governance in very interesting ways.
Vignesh, thank you so much.
No, thanks for the opportunity. I hope the listeners have a good time listening to us.
No, I'm sure like we have discussed a lot of ideas, so I think there's a lot to engage with this conversation. And thank you so much
Yeah.
for your time.
Thanks.